I drove 4 hours through a coastal storm to hold my grandson on his 8th birthday. But when I reached the door, my daughter-in-law handed me an invoice. $1,200 a month, or I would never touch that boy again. My son stood behind her, shaking, saying nothing. I paid. For 6 weeks I paid. Then I placed a single envelope into her hands and watched the blood drain from her face. Hello everyone. Welcome to today's story. Leave a comment telling me where you are watching from and what you would do in this situation. Do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Note, this is a fictional story created for storytelling, but it still carries meaningful and helpful insights. The windshield wipers were losing their war against the rain. Each sweep bought me half a second of visibility before the Atlantic threw another sheet of salt water across the glass, turning the highway into a smear of taillights and wet asphalt. I gripped the wheel with both hands, feeling the old Ford shudder under the crosswind that was barreling across the Outer Banks like a freight train with no brakes. My name is Walter Calloway. I am 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a captain in the United States Coast Guard, pulling people out of water so dark and cold it could stop a man's heart in 90 seconds. I have navigated through Hurricane Floyd, through nor'easters that turned the Pamlico Sound into a washing machine, through fog so thick you could not see the bow of your own vessel. But nothing in 3 decades of ocean rescue prepared me for the storm I was driving into tonight. It was the second Saturday of October. My grandson Jonah was turning 8 years old, in a house 4 hours south of my home on Hatteras Island. 4 hours through a Category 1 remnant that the Weather Service had named Tropical Storm Adeline. Any rational man would have stayed home, watched the radar, and called in the morning. But I had not held that boy in 6 weeks. 6 weeks since Desiree, my daughter-in-law, had decided that my presence in Jonah's life required a financial transaction. I could still feel the weight of the gift in the back seat. A handmade wooden sailboat. I had been carving in my workshop for 3 months. Every plank sanded smooth, every knot sealed with marine varnish, the tiny brass fittings polished until they caught the light, like real hardware. It was not a toy from a shelf. It was a piece of my hands, my history, and the ocean Jonah loved. Have you ever driven through a storm knowing the real danger was not the water on the road, but the person waiting at the other end of it? I reached Wilmington at 7:43 in the evening. The residential streets were quiet, the storm having chased everyone indoors. The neighborhood where my son Bryce lived with Desiree was one of those planned communities where every lawn was measured to the centimeter, and every mailbox stood at the exact same height. It looked like safety. It smelled like control. I pulled into the driveway, the headlights washing across the front of the house. Through the rain-streaked windshield, I could see the warm glow of birthday decorations in the front window. Balloons. Streamers. The shadow of a small boy moving behind the curtain. Jonah. My chest tightened the way it used to when we spotted a distress flare on the horizon. That pull. That urgency. That knowledge that someone you are responsible for is in trouble, and every second you waste is a second they spend afraid. I grabbed the sailboat from the back seat, tucked it under my jacket, and stepped into the rain. The walk from the driveway to the front porch was maybe 20 feet, but the wind hit me sideways with a force that made my bones ache. I was soaked before I reached the first step. The front door opened before I could knock. But it was not a greeting. It was a blockade. Desiree Calloway stood in the doorframe with the posture of a woman who had been rehearsing this moment. She was 36 years old, a licensed financial advisor with a smile that could make you sign documents you had not read. Tonight that smile was absent. In its place was a clinical blankness, the same expression I had seen on insurance adjusters standing over wrecked boats. She held a tablet in one hand and a laminated document in the other. Behind her, in the hallway that led to the kitchen, I could see my son Bryce. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes fixed on the floor. He was 39 years old, a former Navy lieutenant who once commanded a guided missile destroyer in the Persian Gulf. Tonight he looked like a man who had forgotten how to stand up straight. "Happy birthday, Jonah," I called past her, trying to keep my voice steady over the wind. "Look what Grandpa made you." Desiree did not move. She did not look at the sailboat. She looked at me with the flat, assessing gaze of a woman calculating a risk. "Walter," she said, "we need to discuss the family contribution structure before you proceed any further." She held up the tablet. On the screen was a document titled Coastal Legacy Fund, Family Support Agreement. The laminated sheet in her other hand was a printed summary. I could see bullet points, dollar signs, and a signature line at the bottom. I took the paper. The rain was dripping from my jacket onto the porch boards, pooling around my boots like the tide coming in. I read the first 3 lines and felt my stomach drop the way it does when you hit a rogue wave bow first. Monthly contribution of $1,200 to the Coastal Legacy Fund for Jonah's developmental enrichment. All visits subject to fund compliance. Gifts must receive prior written approval with 48-hour notice. I looked up from the paper. $1,200, I said. "You are charging me $1,200 a month to see my own grandson." "It is not a charge, Walter," she said, her voice smooth as glass. "It is a contribution to Jonah's future. His therapist says stability requires structured boundaries, and the fund ensures everyone is invested equally in his well-being." I looked past her at Bryce. He had not moved. He had not spoken. His hands were shaking so badly I could see the tremor from the doorway. "Bryce," I said. "Son, look at me." He did not raise his eyes. Desiree stepped slightly to her left, blocking my line of sight to the hallway. Her perfume hit me then, something expensive and sharp that clashed with the salt air still clinging to my skin. "The contribution is non-negotiable, Walter," she continued. "If you would like to see Jonah tonight, the first payment can be processed through the link on the tablet. Otherwise, we will schedule a compliant visit for next month." Behind her, through the living room window, I saw Jonah. He had pressed his face against the glass, his breath fogging the pane, his eyes wide and searching through the rain and the dark for the shape of his grandfather. He was holding a homemade birthday crown, the construction paper already wilting from the humidity. He raised one small hand and waved. And I understood, with the cold clarity of a man reading a depth chart in a storm, that this woman had turned my grandson's love into a toll booth. I paid. I stood on that porch with the rain hammering my shoulders, pulled out my phone, and transferred $1,200 to a link on a tablet held by a woman who had spent 6 years building a cage around my son so quietly that none of us heard the bars click into place. The confirmation chimed. Desiree glanced at the screen, nodded once, and stepped aside. 30 minutes, Walter. Patio only. I walked past her without a word, through the hallway where Bryce still stood pressed against the wall like a man bracing for impact. Our eyes met for half a second. I saw something I had seen only once before. In the eyes of a young seaman I pulled from a capsized vessel off Cape Lookout. The look of a man who had stopped swimming. The sliding glass door was already open. Jonah was waiting on the covered section of the patio, bouncing on his heels the way 8-year-old boys do when their bodies contain more energy than the world has room for. "Grandpa." He launched himself into my arms with the full-body commitment of a child who has not yet learned to hold anything back. His hands gripped my wet jacket, his face buried against my chest. I could feel his heartbeat against my ribs, fast and light as a wren trapped in a net. "Happy birthday, Captain," I said into his hair, using the nickname I had given him when he was 4 and demanded to steer my skiff through the Hatteras marshes. I set the wooden sailboat on the table. His eyes went wide. He ran his fingers over the hull, the tiny brass cleats, the hand-stitched sail no bigger than a handkerchief. "You made this," he said. It was not a question. We sat on the bench while the storm raged beyond the overhang. I showed him how the rudder moved, the weather withered and tipping, how the sail caught wind from any direction if trimmed right. Inside, Desiree's silhouette moved behind the kitchen blinds. Watching. Timing. Jonah looked up at me. His voice dropped to a whisper, as if he knew instinctively that certain questions were dangerous in this house. "Grandpa, why does it cost money to love me?" Have you ever had a child ask you a question so pure and so devastating that it rearranged the architecture of your entire chest? I have pulled drowning men from 30-foot seas. I have delivered death notifications to families of lost sailors. None of it prepared me for those 9 words from the mouth of a boy who should never have known a price tag had been placed on his grandfather's arms. It does not cost anything to love you, Jonah. Loving you is the freest thing I have ever done. The sliding door opened. Desiree stood there with her phone. Timer app visible. 30 minutes, Walter. Time to wrap up. I kissed the top of his head, pressed the sailboat into his hands, walked back through that house without looking at anyone except the front door and the storm beyond it. The drive home took 4 hours. The rain stopped near Jacksonville, the clouds thinning enough for a sliver of moonlight across the highway. I reached my house on Hatteras at 12:37 in the morning. The porch light was on, the way Maggie always left it. 3 years since pancreatic cancer took her, and I still left that light burning every night like a harbor marker for a ship that was never coming home. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark. The house smelled like cedar and salt air and the ghost of lavender she used to grow in the window box. I opened my laptop, the blue glow feeling like an interrogation lamp in the silent room. I pulled up my bank statements, scrolling back month by month with the methodical focus I once used to scan radar screens for distress signals. There it was. Every single month for 6 months. A withdrawal of exactly $1,200 labeled Coastal Legacy Fund. Maintenance contribution. I had never authorized these payments. Someone had been draining my accounts through automatic transfers I never set up. I cross-referenced the dates. Every withdrawal aligned precisely with a charge to Maggie's legacy savings account, the money she built over 28 years specifically for Jonah's college education. The $1,200 was not new. Desiree had been taking it for half a year. Tonight was not the beginning. It was the moment she decided to make me complicit in my own robbery. My hands stayed steady as I opened the filing cabinet. 31 years of Coast Guard service teaches you calm when the water rises. You assess, you plan, you act. Panic is for passengers, not captains. I found what I was looking for in the bottom drawer. An envelope, cream-colored, addressed to me in Maggie's careful handwriting. She had given it to me 6 months before she died, asking me not to open it unless I felt the current pulling me somewhere I did not understand. The paper was thick and soft, her letters pressed close together as if fitting as much truth as possible into limited space. Walter, my stubborn captain, if you are reading this, something has gone wrong with our boy. I have watched Desiree, the way you watch a weather system forming on the horizon. She is building something, and it is not a family. Trust the currents, not the surface. The truth always washes ashore. Protect Jonah, protect Bryce, and protect our home. The house is more than wood and glass. It is every sunrise we ever watch together, and it belongs to the boy who will one day watch them without us. The house. Our home on Hatteras Island. Oceanfront. Built by Maggie's father in 1974. Worth more than $2 million now that the coast had become a gold mine for developers. I finally understood. The 1,200 was not the robbery. It was the distraction. Desiree was not bleeding me dry with monthly fees. She was positioning herself to take the house where Maggie died, where Jonah took his first steps on the beach, where every sunrise we ever shared still lived in the salt-worn wood. I looked out at the dark Atlantic. Somewhere beneath those waters, the continental shelf drops into a trench so deep no light can reach it. My daughter-in-law's ambition was that trench, and I was about to dive in without a tank. The knock came at 6:15 the next morning. 3 sharp raps against the screen door, the kind that meant business before coffee. I was already awake. I had not slept. Maggie's letter was still on the kitchen table where I had left it, the cream paper catching the first gray light of dawn filtering through the salt-hazed windows. The storm had passed overnight, leaving the air scrubbed clean and heavy with the smell of wet sand and seaweed drying on the shore. I opened the door to find Cordelia Shackelford standing on my porch, with a thermos of black coffee and the expression of a woman who had been holding back information for exactly as long as her patience would allow. Cora was 72 years old. She had run the bait and tackle shop at the Hatteras Marina for 38 years, surviving 3 husbands, 2 hurricanes that took her roof, and a local economy that had tried to replace her with a chain sporting goods store. She failed at none of it. On this island, Nothing moved without Cora knowing about it. Not a fishing charter, not a real estate closing, not a stranger's car parked where it should not be. You look like a man who has been reading bad news, she said, handing me the thermos as she pushed past me into the kitchen. Drink that. Then sit down. Because I have worse. I poured the coffee. It was strong enough to strip varnish. Cora settled into the chair across from me, her weathered hands flat on the table. Last Thursday, she said, her voice dropping low despite the fact that we were the only souls for a quarter mile. A man came to your property while you were gone. Gray sedan. Virginia plates. He walked the perimeter, took photographs of the foundation, the roofline, the lot boundaries. He spent 40 minutes measuring your frontage with a laser device. I set the mug down. A property appraiser. That is what I thought, Cora said. So I wrote down his plate number and asked Harold at the marina if he had seen the car before. He had. Same car was parked outside the county registrar's office in Manteo 2 days prior, pulling deed records. Someone was appraising my home without my knowledge, without my consent, while I was 4 hours away, paying $1,200 for the right to hold my grandson in the rain. Have you ever realized that while you were looking at the wave in front of you, the real danger was the current beneath your feet pulling you out to sea? I need to see Dale, I told Cora. She nodded as if she had already scheduled the meeting in her head. He is at the South Dock, waiting on his charter to cancel because of yesterday's weather. Go now. I will lock up. The Hatteras Marina in early morning smells like diesel fuel, salt-crusted rope, and the sharp metallic tang of fish blood from the cleaning stations. I walked past the charter boats rocking gently in their slips, their outriggers folded down like sleeping birds, until I reached the last dock where a man sat on an overturned bait bucket with a mug of coffee and a newspaper he was not reading. Dale Harwick was 58 years old. He had spent 20 years in the Coast Guard alongside me, before transitioning to the Federal Maritime Financial Crimes Division, where he now investigated fraud, embezzlement, and asset theft targeting coastal communities. He was precise, methodical, and owed me his life. It was 19 years ago this past August. A summer squall hit the Pamlico Sound without warning while Dale was running a solo inspection of a decommissioned navigation buoy. His engine failed. The current dragged his 14-foot skiff into the shoals near Ocracoke, where the hull cracked against an unmarked sandbar. By the time his distress signal reached our station, he had been in the water for 40 minutes in a 3-knot current, with no flotation device. I pulled him out myself. Dove off the rescue vessel because the swimmer on duty had a dislocated shoulder and there was no time to rig the basket. I can still feel the weight of his body against mine in that brown water, the way his fingers gripped my arm with the desperate strength of a man whose lungs were filling with sound. He set down his coffee the moment he saw my face. Walter, what is wrong? I sat on the dock beside him, the wood still damp from last night's storm, and told him everything. The invoice, the Coastal Legacy Fund, the 6 months of unauthorized withdrawals, Maggie's letter, the appraiser Cora had spotted, the house. Dale listened the way he always did. Completely still, eyes fixed on the middle distance, processing data the way a sonar operator processes pings. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. How much is the house worth now? He asked. 2.1 million. Maybe more with the new development regulations pushing demand. He exhaled slowly through his nose. And this fund, Coastal Legacy. You said it is pulling from Maggie's education account too? Same amount. Same dates. 1,200 each. Perfectly synchronized. Dale reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small leather notebook, the kind he used for case notes. He uncapped a pen with his teeth. Give me the full name of the fund, and her maiden name. Desiree Holt. The fund is called Coastal Legacy Fund. Registered, I assume, in North Carolina. He wrote it down. I will run it through federal channels tomorrow. Corporate registration, signatories, associated accounts. If there is a shell underneath this, I will find it. I looked at the water lapping against the pilings, dark green and restless. You do not have to do this, Dale. This is family business. He looked at me. His eyes had the steady warmth of a man who remembered exactly how cold the Pamlico Sound was at night, and exactly whose hands pulled him back to air. "You jumped into a riptide for me when I was 38 years old, Walter. No hesitation. No equipment. You just went in." He closed the notebook. "You think I am going to sit on this dock and let some con artist drag you under?" That night, I was sitting on the back porch, listening to the waves when my phone rang. Dale's name on the screen. His voice had the flat, controlled tone I recognized from our years reading distress signals together. The tone that meant the news was not good, but the man delivering it was steady enough to carry it. "Walter, the Coastal Legacy Fund is not registered to Desiree. It is registered to a man named Victor Holt, her brother. And the mailing address on file is a P.O. box 3 miles from your front door." I gripped the porch railing. The wood was cold and rough under my palm, worn smooth in the places where Maggie used to rest her hands while watching the sunset. "He is already here," I said. "He has been here for months," Dale replied. "And Walter, there is more. The fund is not just draining your accounts. It is listed as the beneficiary on a pending deed transfer. Your deed. Someone is trying to move your house into that shell company without your signature." The waves hit the shore below me, steady and indifferent. The lighthouse beam from Cape Hatteras swept across the dark water in its ancient rhythm, and I realized that the storm I had driven through last night was nothing compared to the one that had already made landfall in my own life. Dale's office in Manteo sat above a hardware store on the waterfront, the kind of building that smelled like old timber and marine-grade caulk. The stairs creaked under my weight as I climbed them 2 days later, each step sounding like a warning I should have heeded years ago. He was waiting at a metal desk covered in printouts, the blue glow of 2 monitors casting his face in the cold light of financial data. A map of the Outer Banks was pinned to the wall behind him, red circles marking locations I did not yet understand. The window overlooked the Roanoke Sound, and through the salt-hazed glass I could see fishing boats heading out for their morning run, oblivious to the war being planned above their heads. "Sit down, Walter," Dale said, "and brace yourself, because this goes deeper than either of us thought." He turned his monitor toward me. On the screen was a flowchart, lines of red and blue connecting boxes with names, dates, and dollar amounts. At the top was my name. At the bottom was a company I had never heard of, called Holt Coastal Ventures, registered in Delaware. Dale traced the path with his pen. "Here is what I found. The Coastal Legacy Fund is not just a shell. It is a funnel. Money goes in from 2 sources: your personal savings account and Bryce's joint checking account with Desiree. Every month, $1,200 from you, and varying amounts from Bryce. Sometimes $500, sometimes $2,000. All labeled as voluntary contributions to a family education trust. Where does it go after the fund?" Dale tapped the next box in the chain, directly into Holt Coastal Ventures. Victor Holt is the sole signatory. From there, the money moves into a real estate escrow account at a bank in Wilmington. He looked at me over the top of his reading glasses. "Walter, in the last 14 months, $47,000 has moved through this pipeline." 47,000. I sat very still. The number hung in the air between us like a depth charge waiting to detonate. 47,000, I repeated. "That is Maggie's entire college fund for Jonah. Every dollar she saved for 28 years. Dale nodded. "And it gets worse." He pulled a second printout from the stack. "This is a quitclaim deed filed 6 weeks ago with the Dare County Register. It transfers ownership of your property on Hatteras Island to Holt Coastal Ventures. The signature on the grantor line is yours." I leaned forward. "That is not my signature." "I know," Dale said, "but it is close enough to pass a cursory review. Someone studied your handwriting. Someone with access to documents you have signed before. Desiree. She had been in my home dozens of times over the years. She had seen my signature on birthday cards, on checks I wrote for Bryce, on the deed itself when I showed it to Maggie's estate attorney after the funeral. Have you ever looked at a piece of paper and realized it was a forgery of your own death warrant? Not a bullet or a blade, but ink on a line. erasing your existence from the land you built your life on. The transfer is not complete, Dale continued. It is sitting in a 30-day review period. The county has a backlog because of the hurricane season filings. But once it clears, your house belongs to Victor Holt. And based on the escrow activity I am seeing, he already has a buyer lined up. A developer out of Charlotte offering $2.3 million. 2.3. More than even I had estimated. The house was worth more dead than I was alive in it. That was the mathematics of Desiree's plan. Dale leaned back and folded his hands. Here is what I am proposing. We have time. Not much, but enough if we are disciplined. The deed transfer needs 24 more days to clear review. In that window, we need 3 things. 1. Documented proof that the signature is forged. 2. A complete financial trail connecting Desiree to the unauthorized fund transfers. 3. Evidence of her intent to defraud, which means we need her on record discussing the plan. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small device. It was matte black, no bigger than a lighter, sealed in a waterproof rubber casing with a single red indicator light. Marine-grade audio recorder, he said, sliding it across the desk. 48 hours of continuous recording, waterproof to 200 feet. The same model we used for undercover maritime investigations. He met my eyes. Starting this Saturday, you are the most agreeable man on the Outer Banks. You pay on time. You follow every rule she sets. You smile. You leave when the timer rings. And you do not give her a single reason to suspect that the confused old man act is exactly that. An act. I picked up the recorder. It was cold and heavy in my palm, the weight of a grenade with the pin still in. How long? I asked. 6 weeks. Dale held up his hand before I could protest. I know it feels like an eternity. But we need a pattern of compliance on your end, and a pattern of escalation on hers. If she thinks she is winning, she will get careless. Greed makes people loud, Walter. We just need to be quiet long enough to hear it. 6 weeks. 42 days of letting a woman treat me like a subscription service while she sold the roof over my head. 42 days of watching my son shrink into a shadow. 42 days of leaving Jonah in a house where love had a price tag. I can do it, I said. For Jonah. For Bryce. I can hold steady. Dale nodded. One more thing. He pulled a folder from beneath the monitor. The developer in Charlotte has a name. Marcus Webb. He has purchased 3 other properties through Holt Coastal Ventures in the past 2 years. All from elderly homeowners. All through the same quitclaim process. This was not personal. It was a system. A machine built to consume the homes of people too old or too isolated to fight back. And my house was next on the conveyor belt. I stood up, the recorder in my pocket, the weight of 47,000 stolen dollars pressing against my chest like ballast in a sinking hold. Through the window, the Roanoke Sound sparkled in the afternoon light, the surface calm and bright. But I knew better than anyone that calm water hides the deepest channels. I have navigated hurricanes with less preparation, I told Dale from the doorway. But none of them were trying to steal my home while I slept. Dale looked up from his papers. Then it is a good thing you are the best captain I have ever sailed with. I walked down the creaking stairs into the salt air of Manteo, the October sun warm on my face, but doing nothing to thaw the cold precision building in my gut. 6 weeks. 1 recorder. 1 envelope at the end that would either save my family or prove that some storms cannot be outrun. The clock started now. I arrived at exactly 1 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. Not 12:59. Not 1:01. Exactly 1. In Desiree's world, punctuality was not a courtesy. It was a compliance metric. The recorder sat heavy in my jacket pocket, pressed against my ribs like a second heartbeat. I had spent the week rehearsing my role. The slightly confused senior. The agreeable old man who followed the rules because the rules were all that kept him connected to his grandson. Every gesture calculated. Every word measured. I was no longer a grandfather visiting his family. I was an operative on a 6-week mission, with a 24-day countdown ticking beneath it, like a depth charge set to a timer I could not see. The first thing I noticed was the camera. A new Ring doorbell unit mounted at eye level, its small black lens blinking with a blue indicator light that told me I was being recorded before I had even lifted my hand to knock. The old brass knocker Maggie had given Bryce as a housewarming gift was gone. In its place was a brushed steel plate with a digital intercom speaker. I pressed the button. Desiree's voice came through the speaker, clinical and stripped of warmth. "You are on time, Walter. Please proceed to the patio. The side gate is unlocked." Not the front door. The side gate. She was routing me around the house like a delivery driver. I walked the flagstone path along the side of the house, past the manicured shrubs and the motion sensor light that clicked on as I passed, adding another layer of surveillance to the perimeter. The backyard gate was unlocked, as promised. A new combination padlock hung loose from the latch, its code presumably known only to Desiree. A gate I could enter, but never open on my own terms. The patio was a covered concrete slab with 2 aluminum chairs and a small table. No cushions, no decoration. Functional, clinical, and designed for exactly one purpose: supervised interaction. Through the sliding glass door, I could see into the living room where Desiree sat at the kitchen island with her laptop open, her position giving her a direct line of sight to the patio through the glass. She did not look up. She did not need to. The camera above the sliding door was doing the watching for her. Jonah appeared from the hallway, his face splitting into the kind of grin that only children and golden retrievers can produce without self-consciousness. He pushed through the sliding door and dropped into the chair beside me, already talking before his body was fully settled. "Grandpa, I learned a new knot at school. The teacher said it was a bowline, but she tied it wrong. Can you show me the real way?" Knot tying. I had chosen this as our activity deliberately. It was educational, required no equipment Desiree could object to, produced no noise she could classify as overstimulating, and most importantly, it required our hands to be close together, close enough to pass things without the camera catching the motion. I pulled a length of paracord from my jacket. Always carried one. 31 years of habit. "A bowline is the king of knots, Captain," I said, keeping my voice at a conversational volume that the indoor microphone could pick up as benign. "It will never slip, and it will never jam. You can trust your life to it." I showed him the rabbit comes out of the hole, goes around the tree, and back down the hole. His small fingers worked the cord with a concentration that reminded me so much of Bryce at that age that my chest ached. We practiced for 20 minutes. Figure eights, cleat hitches, sheet bends, each one a lesson in connection, in how separate lines can be joined to hold weight far beyond what either could carry alone. I was teaching him knots, but I was also teaching him that things can be tied together even when someone is trying to cut them apart. At the 22-minute mark, Desiree stepped into the kitchen to answer her phone, her back turned for perhaps 15 seconds. Jonah's hand moved with a speed and precision that startled me. He reached into his back pocket, pulled out a small piece of paper folded into a square, no bigger than a postage stamp, and pressed it into my palm during the motion of handing back the paracord. His eyes met mine. Steady. Serious. Not the eyes of an 8-year-old, the eyes of a boy who understood that secrets were survival in this house. "For your captain's log, Grandpa," he whispered. "Like you taught me." The words hit me like a rogue wave. I had taught Jonah about captain's logs 2 summers ago during a week he spent with me on Hatteras. "Every good captain keeps a record," I had told him. "Everything that happens on the ship goes in the book. That way the truth always has a place to live, even if the seas get rough." He had remembered. And he had been writing. Desiree returned to her position at the island. I slid the paper into my jacket pocket beside the recorder, my face revealing nothing. We continued practicing knots for the remaining 8 minutes, until the timer on Desiree's phone chimed with the finality of a ship's bell marking the end of a watch. "Time, Walter," she called through the glass. "We will see you next Saturday, same time." I squeezed Jonah's shoulder. "Good work today, Captain. Keep practicing those bowlines." He nodded, clutching the paracord I left with him. Educational material. Not a gift. not subject to her 48-hour approval process. I walked back through the side gate, hearing the combination lock click shut behind me. As I reached my truck, I looked back at the house one final time. Desiree was standing at the living room window, not watching me leave, but raising her phone, photographing my license plate, documenting my departure, the way a warden logs a visitor exit. I climbed into the cab, the engine turning over with a low diesel growl. Only when I was 3 blocks away, safely beyond the range of any camera or microphone, did I reach into my pocket and unfold the tiny square of paper. The handwriting was small and careful, printed in pencil with the deliberate precision of a child who knows his words matter. Captain's log. Day 1. Mom made Dad cry again last night. She took his phone and locked it in her desk. Dad sat on the floor in the hallway for a long time. I brought him water, but he did not drink it. I pulled over to the shoulder of the road. My hands did not shake, my voice did not break, but something behind my ribs shifted and locked into a new position. The position of a man who understood that this was no longer just about money or property. My 8-year-old grandson had just become my most important crew member, and the log he was keeping was the kind of evidence no forged signature could erase. The second Saturday started with a new rule. Desiree was waiting at the side gate this time, not inside the house. She stood with her arms crossed, her phone in one hand and a laminated card in the other, that she held up like a traffic officer directing a vehicle into an inspection lane. New safety protocol, Walter, she said, her voice carrying the rehearsed smoothness of a woman who had practiced this speech in front of a mirror. We have updated our family interaction guidelines to include a vehicle inspection before each visit. We need to ensure that no unapproved items, allergens, or potentially harmful materials enter Jonah's environment. She wanted to search my truck. I maintained the slightly bewildered expression I had been perfecting all week. The furrowed brow, the slow blink, the vague nod of a man who finds the modern world confusing but does not want to cause trouble. Of course, Desiree, I said. Whatever keeps the boys safe. I do not think there is anything in there, except some fishing tackle and old maps. She spent 12 minutes going through my cab, the glove compartment, the center console, the space behind the seats. She even opened the tackle box in the bed of the truck, sorting through lures and weights with her manicured fingers as if looking for contraband. I watched her from the gate, my hands in my pockets, the recorder running silently against my ribs. She found nothing. There was nothing to find. I had scrubbed that vehicle the way I used to scrub a rescue boat before an admiral's inspection. Every legal document, every contact card, every piece of paper that connected me to Dale or the investigation was locked in the bottom drawer of my desk on Hatteras, 60 miles and a world away. Satisfied, she waved me through to the patio. But today something was different. The sliding door was open, and Jonah was inside at the kitchen table, working on a school project. Desiree directed me to sit in the living room while Jonah finished, claiming the patio was being treated for wasps. It was a lie. I could see through the glass that the patio was untouched, but the lie gave me something far more valuable: access to the interior of the house. I sat on the edge of the sectional sofa, my eyes automatically cataloging the room the way they once scanned a vessel's bridge during a boarding inspection. The living room was immaculate, controlled, every surface cleared of personality. No family photos on the walls, no clutter, no evidence that a child or a former Navy officer lived here. It looked like a showroom, designed by someone who understood aesthetics, but not warmth. Bryce appeared from the hallway. He moved slowly, his feet shuffling on the hardwood with the uncertain gait of a man walking through fog. When he reached for a glass of water on the counter, his hand trembled so violently that water sloshed over the rim and splashed across the granite. I studied him with the quiet intensity of a captain, assessing a crewman reporting for duty after an illness. His eyes were wrong. Not the haunted, hypervigilant eyes I had come to expect from his PTSD. These were glazed, unfocused, as if someone had taken his sharp navy gaze and smeared petroleum jelly across the lens. His pupils were dilated, despite the bright kitchen lights. His jaw hung slightly slack, the muscles around his mouth too relaxed for a man in a room with his father. This was not post-traumatic stress. I had seen PTSD for 30 years. In my crew, PTSD makes men rigid, alert, wound tight like anchor chain under load. It does not make them dissolve. Something else was happening to my son. "Hey, Dad," Bryce said, and even his voice was wrong. Flat and distant, like a radio signal breaking up over open water. "Sorry, I cannot stay. I need to lie down." He turned and drifted back toward the hallway like a man sleepwalking through his own life. I watched him go, the cold precision in my gut sharpening into something closer to alarm. I excused myself to the bathroom 10 minutes later. Desiree was on the phone in the kitchen, her voice low and clipped, discussing something about a closing date with someone she called V. I had perhaps 90 seconds. The bathroom was down the hallway, past the master bedroom. The medicine cabinet was behind the mirror. I opened it with one finger, scanning the shelves with the speed of a man who knows exactly what he is looking for even if he does not know what he will find. 3 orange prescription bottles on the second shelf. The first was sertraline. Standard. I knew that one. Bryce had been on it since his discharge for anxiety management. The second was propranolol, also familiar, a beta blocker for the physical symptoms of panic attacks, both prescribed by Dr. Aaron Watts, his VA psychiatrist. The third bottle was different. Different pharmacy. Different prescribing physician. A name I did not recognize. Dr. R. Holt. Holt. The medication was called haloperidol. 5 milligram tablets, dispensed 3 weeks ago. 14 tablets remaining of a 30-count supply, meaning Bryce had taken 16 pills of a medication I had never seen in his regimen before. I closed the cabinet silently and returned to the living room. Jonah had finished his project and was waiting for me on the patio. The wasp treatment story apparently resolved. We practiced sheet bends for the remaining 18 minutes. His fingers were nimble now, already building muscle memory from last week. At the 14-minute mark, his hand moved again. Quick, practiced. A second folded square pressed into my palm with the paracord. Captain's log. Day 8, he whispered without looking up. Important one. The timer chimed. I left through the side gate, the padlock clicking behind me with its weekly finality. In the truck, 3 blocks clear. I unfolded the note. Captain's log. Day 8. Mom hides Dad's phone every night in her desk drawer. She locks it. Dad sleeps all day now. He used to wake up at 0500 every morning and make eggs. Now he does not get up until Mom gives him his medicine at 9. The new medicine makes his hands shake and his words slow. I do not like it. I read it twice. Then I picked up my phone and called Dale. He answered on the second ring. Dale, I need you to look up a medication called haloperidol, 5 milligrams. It is an antipsychotic, and my son is taking it from a bottle prescribed by someone named Dr. R. Holt. The silence on the other end of the line lasted 4 full seconds. In our years working together, I had never heard Dale pause for that long. Haloperidol, he repeated slowly. Walter, that is not a PTSD medication. That is what they give patients in psychiatric holds to suppress agitation and resistance. In the wrong dosage, without proper monitoring, it causes sedation, cognitive decline, tremors, and total erosion of willpower. He paused again. And the prescribing physician, R. Holt, as in Holt, as in Victor. My son was not weak. He was not broken by his past. He was being chemically disabled by the woman who slept beside him every night. And the prescription bore the same last name as the man stealing my house. I gripped the steering wheel until the leather creaked under my hands. The Outer Banks highway stretched before me, flat and empty, the afternoon sun reflecting off the marshland like shattered glass. He is not choosing silence, Dale, I said. She is choosing it for him. The text arrived Thursday evening while I was sanding a kayak hull in my workshop. The buzz of my phone cut through the rhythmic rasp of sandpaper on cedar. Storm advisory for Saturday. Unsafe conditions for elderly drivers. Visit postponed until further notice. I set down the sandpaper and looked out the window. The sky over Hatteras was gray and heavy, whitecaps already forming on the Sound. A late-season nor'easter was building off the Carolina coast. She was not wrong about the weather, but I had been watching Desiree's patterns. Every canceled visit aligned with activity in the Wilmington area. Dale had confirmed it twice. She used storm days as cover for meetings with Victor, the machinery of theft running smoothly while the old man sat obediently at home. Not this time. I left Hatteras at 8 Saturday morning, the nor'easter hitting full force by the time I reached the mainland bridge. The wind was clocking 45 knots, driving rain sideways across the road. The truck shuddered on the exposed stretches of Highway 12. I drove with both hands locked, my body remembering the posture of a man piloting through heavy seas. Have you ever driven toward danger not because you are reckless, but because you know the person you love is in deeper danger if you stay? The drive took 5.5 hours. I reached Wilmington at 1:30. Desiree's sedan was gone. The house looked dark except for a single upstairs light. I parked 2 streets away and walked through the standing water. The side gate was locked. I went to the front door, rang the doorbell twice. No answer. Then I heard it through the garage door. A low, rhythmic moaning. Not pain exactly. Something worse. The sound of a man fighting for air inside his own mind. The garage side entry turned without resistance. I pushed it open into darkness. The smell hit first. Stale air, motor oil, and something sharp and chemical. The only light came from the thin strip of daylight beneath the main door. Bryce was on the concrete floor in the corner, his back against the water heater, knees to his chest, hands gripping his own hair hard enough to turn his knuckles white. His breathing came in ragged, shallow gasps. His whole body convulsed. Not the fine tremor from before, but violent shaking that rattled his teeth. Bryce. I dropped beside him, my voice low and steady the way you speak to a drowning man when you first reach him. Son, I am here. Look at me. His eyes found mine. They were clearer than I had seen in weeks. The haloperidol was wearing off. Without the daily dose smoothing his brain into compliance, his nervous system was rebounding hard. Panic attack layered on chemical withdrawal layered on untreated PTSD. 3 emergencies in one body. I put my hand on the back of his neck, firm and warm. Breathed slowly, audibly, giving his lungs a rhythm. In through the nose, 4 counts. Hold, 4. Out through the mouth, 6. 7 minutes of breathing together on cold concrete while the storm rattled the aluminum above us. Slowly, his gasps became breaths. His grip loosened. His shoulders dropped. Dad. His voice was raw, but real. Not the flat, medicated monotone. His actual voice. I am right here, son. He looked at me with an expression I will carry to my grave. A man locked inside his own body who has just found a crack in the wall. She changed my meds, Dad. The words tumbled out like debris in a flood. 3 months ago, said my old doctor retired. Brought new pills from a new doctor. I did not question it, but I cannot think straight. I try to call you, and forget why I picked up the phone. I try to protect Jonah, and by the time I stand up, I have forgotten what I was standing for. His hands found mine and gripped with a strength Desiree's chemistry had not yet erased. I need you to get me out, Dad. Silent tears cut tracks through the dust on his face. I need you to be the captain one more time. I cannot do it alone. She took my rudder. I am drifting, and I cannot steer. I held his hands. You are not drifting anymore. I have you. We are going to fix this, but I need you to hold on a little longer. Can you do that? He nodded, small and desperate. Then headlights swept across the garage door. Desiree's sedan pulling into the driveway. Tires on wet asphalt. His entire body went rigid. The clarity vanished, swallowed by conditioned terror so profound it was physical. His hands released mine like they had been burned. Go. His lips barely moved. The back fence. Latch on the left side. Go now. If she finds you, she will say you broke in. She will call police. Go. 8 seconds. Maybe 10. Her car door was already opening. I pressed my hand against his cheek once, hard and fast, a promise sealed in skin. Then I was moving. Side door, into rain, across the yard in 4 strides. Fence latch, where he said. Through the neighbor's yard, through a hedge, onto the parallel street just as the front door opened behind me. I walked 2 blocks to my truck in the pouring rain, heart hammering, Bryce's words burning in my chest like a distress flare that would not extinguish. She took my rudder. I am drifting and I cannot steer. I gripped the steering wheel and made a vow to the storm. Not one more day, son. Not one more dose. I am coming back for you. I spent Monday through Thursday in my workshop building a weapon disguised as a gift. The workshop sat behind the main house, a salt-weathered shack with a tin roof that sang in the rain and windows so crusted with sea spray they filtered the light into something golden and ancient. Maggie used to call it my church. It smelled like sawdust and marine varnish and the linseed oil I used to seal everything against the salt air that corrodes metal and memory in equal measure. The fish took shape from a block of Carolina poplar, pale and fine-grained, light enough for a child to carry. I carved it with the same hand tools my father-in-law had used to build this house in 1974. Chisels, rasps, a small curved gouge for the scales. 12 inches long, the body fat and friendly, the kind of fish an 8-year-old boy would want on his bookshelf. But the fish had a secret. In its belly, behind a removable panel sealed with a magnetic latch, invisible to anyone who did not know it was there, I installed a VHF marine radio receiver. Battery-operated, low frequency, the same analog technology we used in the Coast Guard before the world went digital. No Wi-Fi signal, no Bluetooth signature, no app to detect or block. Just a simple radio wave broadcasting on a frequency that only one other device in the world was tuned to receive. The matching receiver sat on my kitchen counter in Hatteras, disguised inside an old weather radio housing. Anything spoken within 15 feet of that fish would transmit directly to my kitchen, 60 miles away, on a frequency no smartphone could intercept. Have you ever built something beautiful knowing its true purpose was war? Saturday arrived. Week 4. I drove the 4 hours to Wilmington with the wooden fish wrapped in tissue paper inside a canvas bag. When I reached the side gate, Desiree was waiting with her clipboard. "What is that?" she said, pointing at the bag. "An educational model," I replied, maintaining my rehearsed tone of mild confusion. I carved it for Jonah's marine biology unit at school. The teacher sent home a note about local species. I thought a physical model would help him visualize the anatomy. She took the fish from my hands and examined it the way a customs agent examines a suspicious package. Turned it over, shook it gently, ran her thumb along the seams. The magnetic panel held perfectly. The poplar was solid enough that the small weight of the receiver inside was indistinguishable from the density of the wood itself. "It is just wood," she said, more to herself than to me. "Fine. But it stays on his shelf. Not in common areas. Perfect." His shelf was in his bedroom, where Desiree made her phone calls at night after Jonah was supposed to be asleep. The visit proceeded under the usual surveillance. Patio. Not tying. 30 minutes. Jonah's face lit up when I handed him the fish, his fingers tracing the carved scales with the reverence of a boy who understood that handmade things carry a different kind of love than store-bought ones. "I made this one special, Captain," I told him. "Keep it on your shelf by your bed. It will watch over you at night. Like a guardian of the deep." He hugged it against his chest. "I will name him Hatteras," he said. "After home." The word hit me like a rogue wave. Home. He called Hatteras home. Not the Wilmington house with its cameras and clinical silence. My house. The house Desiree was trying to steal. I left at the 30-minute mark. Drove back through the afternoon traffic. Reached Hatteras by 7. Made dinner. Washed the dishes. Sat in my kitchen with the lights low and the old weather radio housing on the counter, its speaker facing me like the face of an oracle waiting to deliver a prophecy. At 9:14 that evening, the receiver crackled to life. The first sounds were ambient. Footsteps on carpet. A door closing. The creak of a bed frame as someone sat down. Then Desiree's voice, sharp and clear, as if she were standing in my kitchen instead of 60 miles south. The phone rang once before the other end picked up. A male voice, deeper, rougher at the edges. "V," she said. "Where are we on the timeline?" Victor's response came through with the slight digital compression of a speakerphone. The escrow agent confirmed. 3 weeks from Tuesday. The quitclaim clears county review on the 9th. Webb has the wire ready. 2.3 the moment the deed transfers. 3 weeks. 21 days until my home became someone else's property. Good, Desiree said. And the monthly payments from the old man. Are they still hitting the fund on schedule? Like clockwork. $1,200 on the 15th. Plus the $800 I am pulling from Bryce's disability checks. The fund balance is healthy enough to cover closing costs. She was stealing from Bryce's VA disability payments too. My son's compensation for service-related trauma was being funneled into the machine designed to rob his father. Then Victor asked the question that turned my blood to ice water. What about Bryce? If he snaps out of it and fights the deed transfer, we are exposed. His name is still on the joint account. Desiree's response came without hesitation, without even a pause for breath. I doubled his dose last week. The new concentration keeps him sedated through the evening and confused through the morning. By the time the house sells, he will not remember his own address, let alone a custody hearing. And if the old man asks why Bryce seems off, I will tell him the PTSD is worsening. I am already building the case for residential treatment. 1 more month, and I can have him committed involuntarily. I sat perfectly still in my dark kitchen. The VHF crackled with static between their words, like the sound of a fuse burning toward a charge. She was not just stealing money. She was not just forging deeds. She was systematically destroying my son's mind with medication so that he could never testify, never fight back, never remember enough to stand in a courtroom and say her name. This was not financial fraud. This was chemical imprisonment. I reached for my phone and typed a single message to Dale. Got it all. 3 weeks. Doubled his dose. Residential commitment planned. We move Saturday. Dale's response came 30 seconds later. Copy that, Captain. Shortening the timeline. The envelope goes, week 6. Not a day later. I turned off the receiver and sat in the dark, listening to the Atlantic through my open window. The waves sounded different tonight, not the steady rhythm of patience. The building roar of something about to break. 21 days. And every one of them was a dose my son could not afford to take. I knew before I parked the truck that this visit would be different. The air itself felt charged, the way the atmosphere shifts before a squall line crosses the coast. Something in the geometry of the house had changed. A new car in the driveway. Silver. Virginia plates. The same state where Victor Holt kept his registered business address. I walked through the side gate with my hands in my pockets, the recorder running, my face arranged into the placid expression of an old man who noticed nothing. But my eyes cataloged everything. The silver car's rental sticker on the rear bumper, the freshly printed documents visible through the passenger window, a leather portfolio embossed with the logo of a real estate law firm in Charlotte. Victor was inside. Or had been. Desiree met me on the patio with a new energy in her posture. Not the controlled clinical coldness of the previous weeks. Something quicker. Impatient. The restlessness of a person approaching a finish line. Jonah was already waiting. He had the paracord from 2 weeks ago coiled neatly on the table, and beside it, his wooden fish hatteras positioned facing outward like a sentinel. Good boy. The VHF was still active, still broadcasting. We sat together, and I taught him a new knot. The anchor bend. The knot you use when the connection has to hold under constant strain without ever being able to check it. He worked the cord with nimble fingers, his concentration absolute. But I could see something taut behind his eyes. A readiness. At the 18-minute mark, Desiree stepped inside to answer her phone. The glass door slid shut behind her, muffling her voice into an indistinct murmur. Jonah's hand moved immediately. This time, it was not a single folded square. It was a sheaf of papers, 6 pages folded together tight as a letter in a bottle, pressed into my palm with both hands, and a look that carried the gravity of a boy who understood exactly what he was handing over. All of them, Grandpa, he whispered. Everything since the first one. I kept copies like you taught me. A good captain always has a backup log. 6 entries. 6 weeks of an 8-year-old's observations, recorded in careful pencil print on pages torn from a school composition notebook. I slid them into my jacket pocket beside the recorder, my fingers trembling with a gratitude so fierce it burned. Good work, Captain, I told him. You have done something very brave. He looked at me with eyes too old for his face. Is it almost over, Grandpa? Before I could answer, the glass door opened. Desiree stepped back onto the patio, her phone still in her hand, her expression carrying a new weight. She looked at me with something that might have been triumph poorly disguised as concern. Walter, she said, I need to discuss something with you before you leave today. About Bryce. I sat very still. His therapist and I have been in close consultation, and we both agree that Bryce's condition has deteriorated significantly. He is experiencing confusion, memory gaps, and increasing difficulty with daily functioning. She paused, letting the words settle like sediment in still water. We have made the decision to enroll him in a residential wellness program starting next week. It is a specialized facility in Raleigh that focuses on veterans with complex trauma. He will receive around-the-clock care. Around-the-clock care. The words sounded clinical and compassionate, but I heard what they really meant. A locked facility, no visitors without approval, no phone calls without supervision. My son, chemically silenced by a drug she was administering without his consent, shipped to a facility where no one would question why he could not remember his own father's name. I nodded slowly, keeping my face empty. That sounds like it could be very helpful for him, Desiree, I said. The words tasted like ash. When would he leave? Monday. The intake is already scheduled. 5 days. She was removing Bryce from the board in 5 days. Once he was institutionalized, she would have uncontested access to every document, every account, every legal proceeding. No one to challenge the deed transfer. No one to question the fund. No husband to wake up and remember what had been done to him. The timer chimed. I left through the side gate, walked to my truck, drove 3 blocks until I reached the empty parking lot of a Baptist church at the end of the road. Then I pulled over, killed the engine, and unfolded the captain's log. Entry 3. Mom told Jonah's teacher that Grandpa has a memory disease. She said not to let me talk about him at school. I do not think Grandpa is sick. He remembers everything. Entry 4. A man came to the house today. Mom called him V. He and Mom talked in the office with the door locked. Dad was sleeping on the couch. V looked at papers with our address on them, and Grandpa's address. Entry 5. Mom made Dad sign papers at the kitchen table. Dad's hand was shaking so bad the pen kept sliding. Mom held his hand and moved it for him. Dad did not look at what he was signing. His eyes were closed. Entry 6. Dad tried to call Grandpa today. He got the phone from Mom's desk while she was in the shower, but he could not remember the number. He sat on the floor and cried. Then Mom came out and saw him with the phone. She gave him the medicine, 2 pills this time, not 1. He fell asleep on the couch before dinner. I put a blanket on him. I think Dad is trying to be brave, but the medicine makes him forget how. I set the pages on the passenger seat and stared through the windshield at the empty parking lot. The oak trees above me dripped with last night's rain, each drop hitting the roof of the truck with the measured precision of a countdown. An 8-year-old boy had just documented the systematic chemical destruction of his own father. He had watched his mother forge signatures, double doses, and erase phone calls. And he had written it all down in the careful handwriting of a child who understood that truth needs a place to live when everything around it is being demolished. I picked up my phone and called Dale. He answered on the first ring. Walter. The envelope goes Saturday, I said. Not week 6. This Saturday. She is committing Bryce on Monday. We have 6 days. Not 6 weeks. 6 days. Dale was quiet for 2 seconds. Then his voice came back, tight and precise as a navigation bearing. Then we compressed the timeline. I will have the forensic package finalized by Thursday. The deed fraud affidavit is ready. Your recordings are backed up on 3 separate drives. We go Saturday night. I started the engine. The church parking lot emptied behind me in the rearview mirror. 6 days. 1 envelope. And a captain's log written by the bravest sailor I had ever known. Have you ever held a piece of paper that weighed more than an anchor? I have. Saturday morning, 6 days after Jonah handed me that captain's log, I sat at my kitchen table with every window sealed against the November wind and assembled the heaviest envelope of my life. The kitchen smelled like Maggie's lavender sachets. She kept them in the drawer where I now stored evidence. I pulled the drawer open and laid everything across the oak surface, piece by piece, the way I once laid navigational charts before a rescue mission. First, Dale's forensic audit. 14 pages, single-spaced, detailing $47,000 siphoned through the Coastal Legacy Fund into Holt Coastal Ventures. Every transaction highlighted in yellow. Every forged authorization marked in red. The paper trail ran like a river from my savings account, through Maggie's education fund, into Victor Holt's escrow pocket, and toward a $2.3 million sale that would erase my family from Hatteras Island forever. Second, the quitclaim deed with my signature forged. Dale had hired a certified document examiner in Raleigh named Patricia Voss. Her 3-page affidavit concluded with language so precise it read like poetry. The question signature exhibits fundamental inconsistencies in baseline slant, pen pressure, and letter proportion. It is my professional opinion, to a reasonable degree of certainty, that Walter Calloway did not produce this signature. Third, 3 audio recordings. 2 from my waterproof marine recorder Desiree, discussing the escrow timeline, Victor confirming the developer's offer. 1 from the VHF transmission, Jonah's wooden fish captured Desiree, stating she would double Bryce's medication and file for involuntary commitment. I had burned each recording onto separate USB drives and printed time-stamped transcripts. 4th, the captain's log. 6 entries in a child's handwriting. Blue crayon on lined notebook paper, each page folded into quarters the way Jonah folded them to fit inside his pocket. I photocopied every entry, preserving the originals in a waterproof sleeve. Entry number 6 still made my hands shake. Dad forgot my name today. 5th, the medication evidence. Photographs of the haloperidol bottle prescribed by Dr. R. Holt, a physician whose medical license, according to Dale's research, had been suspended in Virginia 18 months prior for overprescribing controlled substances. Pharmacy records showing the prescription was filled at 3 different locations to avoid detection. Dale's written analysis connecting R. Holt to Victor Holt Brothers. 6th, Cora's sworn affidavit. 3 pages describing the appraiser's visit, the Virginia Plate sedan, and 14 months of observations packages arriving at odd hours. Bryce's deteriorating appearance, Jonah's increasingly withdrawn behavior at the school bus stop. I arranged the documents in order. I slid them into a 9x12 manila envelope, the heavy-duty kind with the metal clasp, the kind I used to store discharge papers and commendation letters. I sealed it with clear packing tape across every seam. Then I wrote on the front in black marker, block letters, "For Desiree, Holt open immediately." My phone buzzed at 11:14. Dale. "Package ready on my end too," he said. "Certified copies going to the Dare County Registrar Monday morning. I've got a hold request filed with Judge Whitmore's clerk. The deed transfer cannot process while that hold exists. And the other copies? 1 set to the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, Financial Crimes Division. 1 to Bryce's VA caseworker. The medication records alone will trigger an immediate welfare check. And 1 to the North Carolina Medical Board regarding Dr. R. Holt's prescribing activity. 6 copies. 6 different agencies. Even if Desiree destroyed my envelope, the information had already multiplied like signal flares across the horizon. "Saturday night," I said. "We go Saturday night?" 2,200 hours, Dale confirmed. I'll be parked at the church lot on Lighthouse Road. You deliver the envelope. I stay on standby with the sheriff's non-emergency line pre-dialed. I hung up and looked at the envelope. Inside those pages lived 14 months of patience, 6 weeks of protocol, $47,000 of theft, a child's desperate chronicle, and a son's stolen mind. All compressed into 3/4 of an inch of paper. Maggie's photograph watched me from the mantelpiece. I could almost hear her voice, that calm, teacher's tone she used when I overthought a rescue plan. You have the current, Walter. Stop fighting it. Ride it home. I placed the envelope in my truck's lockbox at noon. I checked the clasp twice, the tape 3 times. Then I drove to the South Dock and sat on the pier where Maggie and I used to watch pelicans dive at sunset. The water was steel gray, the wind bitter, the sky pressing low like a ceiling about to collapse. 12 hours until delivery. I had spent 31 years pulling people from water that wanted to kill them. I had learned one truth above all others. You cannot save someone by asking the ocean to be gentle. You save them by being stronger than the current, more patient than the tide, and more prepared than the storm. Tonight, I would not knock politely. I would not pay $1,200. I would not stand in the rain while a timer counted down my love. Tonight, I would hand Desiree Holt an envelope, and I would watch her empire collapse the way a sandbar collapses when the hurricane surge finally overruns it all at once, completely, and without any possibility of reconstruction. 12 hours. The lighthouse beam swept across the water, steady and indifferent, the way justice ought to be. The clock on my dashboard read 21:47 when I turned onto Lighthouse Road. 13 minutes early. A captain arrives before the tide, never after. November darkness, on the outer banks, carries a texture you can almost touch, thick, salt-heavy, pressing against your windshield like a living thing. No streetlights on this stretch, just the distant pulse of Cape Hatteras, sweeping its beam every 7.5 seconds. I counted the intervals the way I used to count them from the bridge of a cutter, one method of keeping your hands steady when your chest feels like it holds a grenade. Dale's black SUV sat in the church parking lot, exactly where he promised. I flashed my headlights once. He flashed back twice. Our old Coast Guard signal. I see you. Proceed. I drove the remaining 1/4 mile to Desiree's house with my headlights off. The neighborhood was asleep, porch lights glowing amber behind sea oats, the occasional blue flicker of a television through salt-stained glass. Her house sat at the end of the cul-de-sac, a 2-story coastal colonial that my son had chosen because it reminded him of our Hatteras home. That memory stung like a jellyfish, quick, sharp, and impossible to ignore. Desiree's sedan was in the driveway. No Virginia plates beside it tonight. Victor was not here. Good. I parked 3 houses down, killed the engine, and retrieved the envelope from my lockbox. It felt heavier than it had this morning, as if 12 hours of waiting had added gravity to every page inside. I tucked it under my jacket, stepped into the cold, and walked. The wind carried the smell of wood smoke and dried seaweed. My boots made no sound on the wet asphalt. At the property line, I paused and listened. Nothing but the distant Atlantic, breathing its endless breath against the shore. Then a sound that stopped me completely. Crying. Small, muffled, coming from the second-floor window. Jonah's room. I stood beneath that window for perhaps 10 seconds, but those seconds stretched into something infinite. My grandson was crying alone in a dark room at 10 o'clock at night, while his father lay drugged in another room, and his mother schemed to sell the ground beneath their feet. Something shifted inside my chest. Not anger. I had carried anger for 6 weeks, and it had become familiar, almost comfortable. This was different. This was the cold, absolute clarity I felt only once before in my career. The night a fishing vessel capsized in 12-foot swells, and I had to choose between protocol and instinct. I chose instinct then. I chose it now. I walked to the front door and knocked. Not politely. 3 firm strikes with my knuckles, the knock of a man delivering a warrant, not a request. 30 seconds. The porch lights snapped on. The deadbolt turned. Desiree opened the door in a gray cashmere robe, her hair pulled back, reading glasses perched on her forehead. She looked like a woman interrupted during evening tea, not a woman orchestrating the theft of a family. Walter. Her voice carried that practiced warmth, honeyed, controlled, the tone of a financial advisor delivering bad news with a smile. It's nearly 10. You don't have a scheduled. I extended the envelope. She stared at it, at my hand, at the block letters facing her. For Desiree Holt, open immediately. What is this? Open it. Walter. I don't appreciate. Open it, Desiree. Or the 6 copies I've already distributed will speak for themselves. The honey drained from her voice. Her eyes narrowed a fractional movement, barely perceptible, but I had spent 6 weeks studying this woman the way I once studied storm patterns. I saw the calculation begin. I saw the options scrolling behind her pupils. She took the envelope. I watched her break the tape, unfold the clasp, and slide the documents into her hands. The forensic audit came first. She scanned the first page, the flowchart, showing her pipeline from my account through Coastal Legacy Fund to Victor's escrow. Her jaw tightened. Page 2. The transaction list. $47,000 highlighted in yellow. Her breathing changed. This is you can't just... Page 6, I said. The quitclaim deed analysis. Patricia Voss, certified document examiner. My signature was forged. You know it. I know it. And now Judge Whitmore's clerk knows it. She flipped pages. Her fingers trembled, not from cold. Page 9. Audio transcripts. Your VHF conversation with Victor about the escrow deadline. Your statement about doubling Bryce's medication. Time-stamped. Authenticated. Her face had lost 2 shades of color. The porch light made her look almost gray. And the last section, I continued. A captain's log, written by an 8-year-old boy who documented everything you did to his father. Every pill. Every signature you forced. Every lie you told his teacher. Desiree's hands went still. The papers trembled in the November wind, but her fingers no longer moved. She was reading Jonah's entry 6. I knew which one, because I saw the blue crayon through the photocopied page. Dad forgot my name today. You have 24 hours, I said. By tomorrow night, the deed transfer hold becomes permanent. The NC State Bureau of Investigation receives their copy Monday morning. Bryce's VA caseworker will initiate a welfare check within 48 hours. And the medical board will begin proceedings against your brother's license, or what remains of it. She looked up. For the first time in 14 months, Desiree Holt had nothing prepared to say. No invoice, no protocol, no timer, no laminated document, just silence and the sound of the ocean behind us, indifferent and vast. You can't prove. I already have 6 copies, 6 agencies. You could burn that envelope right now, and it would change nothing. I stepped back from the doorway. The lighthouse beam swept across the roof above her, that 7.5-second interval, steady as a heartbeat. I'm taking my son home tomorrow, I said. And my grandson. If you interfere, the criminal referral goes to the district attorney instead of remaining with the SBI. That is not a negotiation. That is a weather report. I turned and walked back down the path. Behind me, I heard no door close. No voice calling after me. Just the rustle of paper in the wind, $47,000 worth of evidence trembling in the hands of a woman who had finally run out of current to ride. At the church lot, I flashed my headlights once. Dale flashed twice. Proceed. Mission complete. I sat in my truck for 11 minutes before I could drive. My hands shook not from cold, not from fear, but from the release of something I had carried so long it had become part of my skeleton. 14 months of silence. 6 weeks of protocol. 1 envelope. Maggie's voice again, soft as the tide against sand. You wrote it home, Captain. Tomorrow, I would bring Bryce and Jonah to Hatteras. Tomorrow, my grandson would wake to the sound of waves instead of the sound of his mother's calculations. Tomorrow, the lighthouse would still be shining. But tonight, I let myself weep. The way the ocean weeps against the shore. Quietly, endlessly, and without any shame at all. I arrived at Desiree's house at 7:15 the next morning, Sunday. The sky was the color of raw pearl, that thin, luminous gray the Outer Banks wears after a cold front passes through. The air tasted clean, scrubbed by last night's wind, carrying the faint sweetness of marsh grass and the promise of a tide turning. Dale's SUV was already parked at the curb. Beside it, a white sedan I did not recognize, but the emblem on the door told me everything. Dare County Sheriff's Office, Civil Division. Dale had called in the welfare check 12 hours ahead of schedule. I stepped out of my truck, and Dale met me on the sidewalk. He wore his old Coast Guard windbreaker, the one with the faded reflective stripe across the chest. His face was calm, but his eyes carried that operational focus I remembered from 30 years of shared water. VA caseworker called at 0600, he said. Bryce's prescription records triggered an automatic flag. They dispatched a crisis counselor from the Greenville VA Medical Center. She's inside now with the deputy. Desiree answered the door at 0645. Cooperative so far. She hasn't called an attorney yet, which tells me she's still calculating options. A woman in a navy blazer stepped onto the porch, mid-40s, clipboard in hand, lanyard ID swinging. She spoke briefly with the deputy, then walked toward us. Mr. Calloway? She extended her hand. I'm Dr. Rachel Simmons. Crisis Intervention. Greenville, VA. Your son is awake and responsive. His vitals are stable, but he's showing significant signs of prolonged antipsychotic exposure. Tardive symptoms in his hands, cognitive fog, mild dysarthria. I've recommended immediate medical transport to the VA facility for supervised withdrawal. Is he willing? He asked for you. She paused. He said, Tell my dad the captain came back. Something cracked open in my chest, not breaking, but releasing, like ice fracturing on a spring river. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment, and walked past her toward the house. The front door stood open. Inside, the house looked different in morning. Light smaller. Somehow, stripped of the authority darkness had given it. The living room furniture was expensive but cold. No photographs on the walls. No crayon drawings on the refrigerator. A house decorated for appraisal, not for living. Desiree sat at the dining table with the deputy, a young man, maybe 30, with patient eyes and a notepad. She wore the same gray robe from last night, her hair now loose, her face bare of makeup. Without the armor of preparation, she looked exactly her age, 36. Young enough to be my daughter. That thought carried no sympathy, only a strange, clinical observation, the way you note water temperature before a dive. She did not look at me as I passed. Bryce was in the back bedroom. A guest room, I realized, not the master. A single bed, a nightstand with 3 prescription bottles lined up like soldiers, a glass of water untouched. He sat on the edge of the mattress in a gray t-shirt and sweatpants, his hands resting on his knees. Those hands trembled with a rhythmic, involuntary movement I had never seen before, the tardive symptoms Dr. Simmons mentioned. But his eyes were clear, not the glazed, vacant stare I had seen in the garage 3 weeks ago. Not the fog-covered pupils of a man drowning in chemicals. These were my son's eyes, brown, warm, carrying that quiet intensity he inherited from Maggie. He looked at me the way he looked at me when he was 12 years old, and I came home from a 3-week patrol like I was the entire coastline condensed into one person. Dad, his voice cracked on the single syllable. I crossed the room in 3 steps and sat beside him. I did not embrace him immediately. I had learned in rescue operations that survivors need a moment to confirm reality before accepting contact. So I placed my hand on his shoulder and let it rest there, steady, the way an anchor chain holds without pulling. I'm here, I said. And you're coming home. Jonah is coming too. Bryce's breath left him in a single, shuddering exhale. His head dropped forward and his shoulders curved inward, and he wept. Not the quiet, controlled tears of a man trying to maintain dignity, the deep, wrenching sobs of a man releasing 14 months of captivity. His body shook beneath my hand, and I held him the way I held him when he was 9 years old, and his dog drowned in a riptide with my whole arm around his back, my chin on top of his head, rocking slightly, saying nothing because nothing needed to be said. 3 minutes, maybe 4. Then he straightened, wiped his face with the back of his trembling hand, and looked toward the hallway. She's still here? The deputy is with her. She's cooperating. The documents, the things she made me sign, voided. Dale filed the fraud affidavit. Judge Whitmore issued a temporary restraining order at 0700 this morning. The deed transfer is permanently blocked. The Coastal Legacy Fund is frozen. Bryce stared at me. How long? 6 weeks of gathering evidence. 14 months of patience. And 1 envelope. He almost smiled. Almost. The muscles of his face tried to form it, but the medication had stolen even that simple reflex. It would return. Everything would return. Where's Jonah? I asked. Upstairs. His room. Bryce's voice dropped. She locked his door at night. Said it was for safety. He has a deadbolt on the outside. I stood. The hallway stretched before me, 12 steps to the staircase, 14 steps to the top. I climbed them without hurrying. A captain does not rush when the rescue is already underway. A captain moves with deliberate certainty, because certainty is what survivors need to see. Jonah's door had the deadbolt Bryce described, a brass lock positioned 5 feet from the floor, far above an 8-year-old's reach. I slid it open. The sound was small, metallic, final. The last lock in a chain of 14 months. The room inside was small and painted pale blue. A single bed with a nautical-themed comforter, sailboats, and anchors, chosen by a boy who loved the sea. A bookshelf, a desk, and sitting on the bed, already dressed in jeans and a red sweatshirt, was my grandson. He was holding the wooden fish. Grandpa. No surprise in his voice. No tears. Just that calm, certain tone of a child who had been waiting, who had known somehow that the captain would come. Morning, sailor, I said. Is it today? It's today. He slid off the bed, crossed the room, and wrapped both arms around my waist. His head pressed against my stomach, and he held on with a strength that seemed impossible for a body so small. I placed my hand on his hair, soft, brown, smelling of children's shampoo and salt air, and I let the moment exist without rushing it. The lighthouse beam had been sweeping all night. And now, finally, daylight had come. The drive from Wilmington to Hatteras Island takes 4 hours and 22 minutes on a clear day. That Sunday morning, with Bryce sleeping in the passenger seat and Jonah buckled in the back with the wooden fish resting on his lap, it took 4 hours and 37 minutes. I drove 15 miles below the speed limit the entire way. A captain does not rush when carrying precious cargo through safe waters. Bryce slept the way a man sleeps when he has not truly rested in 14 months, deeply, completely, his face slack and his breathing slow, his trembling hands finally still against his thighs. Dr. Simmons had given him a mild sedative for the drive, something to ease the transition between Desiree's chemical prison and the supervised withdrawal program he would begin Monday at the Greenville VA. One more day, one more night. Then the slow, difficult process of reclaiming his mind. Jonah did not sleep. He sat upright the entire drive, watching the landscape change through his window, the suburban sprawl of Wilmington, giving way to flat agricultural fields, then the pine forests of the coastal plain, then the long bridges spanning the Sounds, and finally the narrow ribbon of Highway 12, stretching south toward Hatteras. He did not ask questions. He did not fidget. He simply watched, the way a sailor watches unfamiliar waters with alert, patient attention, cataloging everything. At the Bonner Bridge, the long span connecting Bodie Island to Hatteras, Jonah spoke for the first time in 2 hours. Grandpa, the water looks different here. It is different. Pamlico Sound on your left. Atlantic Ocean on your right. 2 bodies of water separated by nothing but this road, and a few miles of sand. Which one is stronger? I considered the question. Depends on the storm. The Atlantic has more power, but the Sound has more patience. In a hurricane, It's the sound that floods the island not from force, but from persistence. It just keeps rising. Jonah was quiet for a moment. Then, I think I'm the sound. I looked at him in the rearview mirror. 8 years old, holding a wooden fish with a hidden radio inside. Author of 6 captain's log entries that had helped dismantle a criminal conspiracy. And he was telling me he was the patient water, not the powerful one. I think you're right, sailor, I said. We arrived at my house at 12:04. The old Hatteras cottage, cedar shingles, weathered silver, raised on pilings the way my father built it in 1974. The wraparound porch facing east toward the Atlantic. Cora was waiting on the front steps with a pot of clam chowder and a bag of cornbread she had baked at 5 that morning. She said nothing when she saw Bryce being helped from the truck. She simply nodded, took Jonah's hand, and led him inside while I guided my son up the stairs. I put Bryce in Maggie's reading room, the small bedroom on the south side, with the wide window overlooking the dunes. Maggie had spent her last months in that room, watching the seagrass bend in the wind, reading poetry collections, writing letters I only found after she passed. It seemed right that Bryce would heal there too. Some rooms carry medicine in their walls. By 2 o'clock, Bryce was sleeping again, and Jonah was on the porch with Cora, eating chowder and asking her questions about the fishing boats visible on the horizon. I sat at the kitchen table with my phone and called Dale. Legal update, he said without preamble. Judge Whitmore's clerk confirmed the temporary restraining order is active. Desiree is prohibited from contacting Bryce, Jonah, or you until the hearing on December 4th. That gives us 11 days to prepare. What about Victor? NCSBI opened a formal investigation this morning. The fraud affidavit, the forged deed, and the financial trail are all in their hands now. I spoke with Special Agent Morales. She said the shell company structure alone is enough to pursue charges. The medication angle adds a potential assault count. They're looking at conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse, forgery, and possibly reckless endangerment for the haloperidol situation. Will they arrest him? Not yet. They want to build the full case first, connect Victor's prescribing brother, establish the financial conspiracy chain, interview the pharmacy staff. But Morales said, and this is her word, the case is airtight. Walter, you built something these investigators rarely see. A complete evidentiary package assembled by the victim with chain of custody documentation, third-party verification, and corroborating testimony from multiple sources. I leaned back in my chair. The kitchen window framed the Atlantic gray-blue, restless, eternal. What about the house? My house? Permanently protected. The fraudulent quitclaim deed has been flagged and quarantined in the county system. Even if Desiree found another notary willing to forge your signature, which she won't, the registrar's office has a red flag alert on your property. Nothing moves without your physical presence and government-issued identification. And the money? The $47,000? Frozen in the Coastal Legacy Fund account. Once the criminal case resolves, and it will resolve in your favor, restitution is virtually guaranteed. Morales estimates 6 to 9 months for full recovery of funds. I exhaled. 6 to 9 months. After 14 months of theft. That felt almost generous. One more thing, Dale said. The medical board acknowledged receipt of our complaint regarding Dr. R. Holt's prescribing activities. They've initiated a formal review. His license, already suspended, will likely be permanently revoked. That man will never write another prescription. I thanked Dale and ended the call. Then I sat in silence for a long time, listening to the sounds of my house coming back to life. Cora's laughter from the porch, the creak of old floorboards, the distant crash of waves, and somewhere upstairs, the quiet breathing of my son sleeping in his mother's room. At 4:30 that afternoon, Jonah found me on the back deck. I was sitting in Maggie's Adirondack chair, watching the sun descend toward the sound. He climbed into my lap without asking, something Desiree's protocols had forbidden for over a year. No scheduled time, no invoice, no timer counting down. Just a boy and his grandfather and the fading warmth of a November sun. Grandpa. Yes, sailor. Do I have to go back? No. Ever? I wrapped my arms around him. He weighed almost nothing, 62 pounds of courage and patience and blue crayon truth. You're home, Jonah. This is home, and nobody charges admission to home. He pressed his face against my chest. The wooden fish sat on the deck beside us, its painted eye staring out at the ocean like a sentinel. Inside it, the VHF radio was silent now. It had done its work. The transmission was complete. The lighthouse beam would begin its sweep in another hour when full darkness arrived. But we did not need it yet. We had daylight. We had chowder on the stove, and cornbread on the counter, and a spare bedroom where a man was slowly returning to himself. We had a porch that faced the sea, and a door that carried no deadbolt. For the first time in 14 months, we had safe harbor. December 4th arrived the way storms arrive on the Outer Banks, slowly at first, then all at once. For 11 days I had prepared. For 11 days I had watched Bryce regain pieces of himself, the way a shoreline reclaims sand after a hurricane, grain by grain, tide by tide, painfully slow but undeniably forward. The Dare County Courthouse sits in Manteo, a 40-minute drive from Hatteras Village. A brick building with white columns, built in 1954, renovated twice, still carrying that particular gravity. Courthouses hold the weight of decisions made permanent by ink and gavel. I arrived at 8:20, 40 minutes before the hearing. Dale was already inside, seated in the gallery with a leather binder containing duplicate copies of everything we had submitted to Judge Whitmore's clerk 2 weeks prior. Bryce sat beside me in the front row. 10 days of supervised withdrawal at the Greenville VA had returned his hands to near stillness. Only a faint tremor remained in his left pinky, a ghost of the haloperidol that would fade completely within 6 months, according to his neurologist. His eyes were fully clear now. His jaw no longer hung slack. When he spoke, his words arrived in proper sequence, at proper speed, carrying the quiet authority of a man who had taught high school students for 15 years before Desiree dismantled him. He wore the Navy suit Maggie had bought him for his 30th birthday. It still fit. Jonah was not present. Cora stayed with him at my house, building a sand castle on the South Beach and feeding saltine crackers to the seagulls. An 8-year-old does not belong in a courtroom. His testimony existed in 6 pages of blue crayon, already entered into evidence. At 9 o'clock, Judge Whitmore entered a woman of perhaps 65, silver hair cut short, reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck. She moved with the efficiency of someone who had presided over 1,000 cases and wasted time in none of them. The clerk announced the case. In the matter of Callaway v. Holt, emergency protective order and related relief. Desiree sat on the opposite side of the aisle, with her attorney, a tall man in a charcoal suit I did not recognize. She wore a cream blouse and pearl earrings, her hair styled in soft waves, her posture composed. She looked like a woman attending a charity luncheon, not a woman facing criminal referral. That composure was her final weapon, and she wielded it with the same precision she had wielded invoices and protocols for 14 months. My attorney, Silas Brannigan, a lean, quiet man of 53 who had practiced family law in the Outer Banks for 26 years, stood and presented our petition. His voice carried no drama. He laid facts the way a mason lays bricks, one at a time, level, plumb, unshakable. The Coastal Legacy Fund, 14 months of unauthorized withdrawals, totaling $47,000. The forged quitclaim deed, the document examiner's affidavit, the shell company Holt Coastal Ventures registered to Victor Holt, the audio recordings, the VHF transcript, the pharmacy records showing haloperidol, prescribed by a physician whose license had been suspended. Dr. Simmons' medical evaluation documenting the effects of prolonged antipsychotic administration on a patient with no psychotic diagnosis. And the captain's log. 6 entries read aloud by Silas in his measured, unhurried voice. The courtroom was silent. I watched Judge Whitmore's face as she listened. Her expression did not change. Judges learn to hold their features, still the way captains learn to hold a wheel steady. but her pen stopped moving on entry 4. And on entry 6, Dad forgot my name today. She removed her reading glasses and set them on the bench. Desiree's attorney responded with the only argument available to him: context. He claimed the Coastal Legacy Fund was a legitimate family financial planning vehicle. He claimed the visitation structure was designed to protect Jonah from Walter's erratic behavior, a phrase that hung in the air like smoke with no fire beneath it. He produced no evidence of erratic behavior. He produced no medical professional willing to testify that Bryce's medication was appropriate. He produced no explanation for the forged signature. He produced no counter to the shell company's existence. Judge Whitmore listened with the same patience she had shown our side. Then she asked a single question. "Counselor, can your client explain why a quitclaim deed bearing Mr. Walter Calloway's signature was filed with the Dare County Registrar on a date when Mr. Calloway was documented by his own physician's office to be in Hatteras Village, approximately 93 miles from the notary's office listed on the deed?" Desiree's attorney requested a brief recess. Judge Whitmore denied it. "The question stands, Counselor." Silence. Desiree leaned toward her attorney and whispered. He straightened, adjusted his tie, and said, "Your Honor, my client exercises her Fifth Amendment right and declines to answer." That sentence collapsed the last wall. The Fifth Amendment protects against self-incrimination. Invoking it in a civil hearing told Judge Whitmore everything the evidence already proved. Desiree knew the deed was forged. Desiree knew answering would confirm criminal liability. And now, by refusing to answer, she confirmed it anyway. Judge Whitmore ruled from the bench. No recess. No deliberation. She spoke for 7 minutes, the longest 7 minutes of my life, and simultaneously the shortest. First, the emergency protective order was made permanent. Desiree was prohibited from contacting Walter, Bryce, or Jonah. No phone calls, no emails, no third-party communication, no physical proximity within 500 feet. Second, temporary sole custody of Jonah was awarded to Bryce Calloway, effective immediately, pending a full custody hearing in January. Desiree was granted no visitation rights until a psychological evaluation and parenting assessment could be completed, a process that would take, at minimum, 90 days. Third, the fraudulent quit-claim deed was declared void. The Dare County Registrar was ordered to expunge it from all records. Walter Calloway's property on Hatteras Island was confirmed as solely and entirely his unencumbered, unthreatened, permanent. Fourth, the Coastal Legacy Fund, all assets, accounts, and associated holdings was frozen pending the outcome of the SBI criminal investigation. Restitution of $47,000 was ordered upon resolution. Fifth, a criminal referral was issued to the Dare County District Attorney for charges including forgery, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and conspiracy to commit fraud. A separate referral was issued to the NC Medical Board regarding Dr. R. Holt. Judge Whitmore set her gavel down. She had not needed to use it. The courtroom remained silent throughout and looked directly at Desiree. "Mrs. Calloway," she said, "this court does not often see a case assembled with the thoroughness presented today. The evidence before me does not merely suggest financial exploitation. It demonstrates a calculated, sustained campaign to isolate, control, and defraud members of your own family. This court takes that very seriously." Desiree did not move. Her composure held, but it held the way a seawall holds in the final hour before collapse, rigid, cracked, waiting for the next wave. I did not look at her as we left. I looked at Bryce. He stood beside me in Maggie's navy suit, his shoulders straight for the first time in over a year, his eyes dry, his jaw set. He extended his hand toward Silas Brannigan and shook it firmly, no tremor. "Thank you," Bryce said. Outside, the December air was cold and sharp and tasted like freedom. Dale waited on the courthouse steps, his old windbreaker zipped to his chin, and when he saw our faces, he simply nodded. The mission nod. The one that says, "It's done. Well done." I called Cora from the parking lot. She answered on the first ring. Tell Jonah his father is coming home, I said. Tell him the captain's log worked. Tell him the lighthouse is still shining. Through the phone, I heard her relay the message. And then I heard my grandson's voice, small, bright, carrying across the coastal wind like a bell. I know, Grandpa. I already knew. December on Hatteras Island carries a quietness that tourists never witness. The summer crowds vanish by October, the rental houses go dark, and the island returns to the people who belong to it, the fishermen, the shopkeepers, the old Coast Guard families who built their homes on stilts and their lives on salt water. In that quietness, healing becomes possible. Not easy, never easy, but possible. Bryce moved into the south bedroom, Maggie's reading room, on December 6th, 2 days after the hearing. His withdrawal program at the Greenville VA continued as an outpatient schedule. 3 visits per week, blood panels every Monday, cognitive assessments every Friday. Dr. Simmons assigned him a neuropsychologist named Dr. Catherine Yates, a small woman with steady hands and a voice like warm sand, who specialized in medication-induced cognitive recovery. The first week was brutal. Bryce's body, freed from 14 months of chemical suppression, rebelled with the fury of a caged animal, suddenly released. Night sweats soaked his sheets by 2 in the morning. His hands shook so violently he could not hold a coffee mug until noon. Headaches arrived in waves, sharp, blinding, lasting 20 to 40 minutes before receding. He vomited twice on Wednesday, 3 times on Thursday. I sat with him through every episode. Not speaking. Speaking was not what he needed. I sat in Maggie's wicker chair beside the bed, reading her old poetry collections aloud when the silence grew too heavy, or simply existing as a presence in the room. A fixed point. An anchor. I had learned in 31 years of rescue work that sometimes the most powerful thing you can offer a drowning man is not a rope, but a steady voice saying, I am here. I am not leaving. The shore still exists. By the second week, the tremors diminished. By the third, Bryce could hold a pen. He began writing not coherent sentences at first, just fragments, words on yellow legal pads that I never read, because they were not mine to read. Dr. Yates called it cognitive reintegration, the brain rebuilding neural pathways that haloperidol had severed. She compared it to physical therapy after a stroke. Painful, exhausting, but measurably progressive. Jonah adapted the way children adapt to everything with terrifying speed and absolute commitment. Within 3 days of arriving at Hatteras, he had claimed the small attic bedroom as his own, decorated its walls with crayon drawings of lighthouses and fishing boats, and established a morning routine that revolved entirely around the ocean. 6:45, wake. 6:50, dress. 7:05, walk to the beach with Grandpa. 7:15 to 7:45, watch the waves, identify birds, count pelican dives, collect shells. 7:50, return for breakfast. He never once asked about his mother. I noticed this absence, the way you notice a missing buoy in familiar waters, not with alarm, but with careful attention. On December 14th, I mentioned it to Dr. Yates during one of Bryce's sessions. She nodded slowly. Children process abandonment differently than adults, she said. Jonah spent 14 months in a controlled environment where love was transactional and access was monetized. His silence about Desiree isn't avoidance, it's relief. He's not suppressing the memory. He's simply choosing not to carry it anymore. Should I be concerned? Watch for regression nightmares, bedwetting, sudden aggression. If those appear, we intervene. But right now, his behavior indicates a child who feels safe for the first time in a very long time. Safety is the foundation. Everything else builds on top of it. Safety. The word echoed in my chest like a bell struck in a stone cathedral. I had spent 6 weeks constructing a legal and evidentiary fortress to protect my family. But safety was not a document, or a court order, or a frozen bank account. Safety was a morning walk on a cold beach. Safety was a grandfather who showed up every single day. Safety was a bedroom with no deadbolt on the outside. Christmas arrived without ceremony. Cora brought a 12-pound turkey and enough sweet potato casserole to feed the entire village. Dale came with his wife, Mary Ann, a retired librarian, with silver braids and a laugh that filled rooms. We ate at the long table in my kitchen, the one Maggie and I had built from reclaimed dock planks 30 years ago, and for the first time in 2 years, every chair was occupied. Jonah gave me a gift he had made himself, a drawing on construction paper folded into a card. The front showed a lighthouse with a beam reaching across dark water. Inside, in careful blue crayon, he had written, "To Grandpa. Thank you for keeping the light on. Love, Jonah." Captain's log final entry. I did not cry at the table. I waited until 11 that night, when the house was asleep and the only sound was the Atlantic breathing against the shore, and I sat on the back deck with that card in my hands, and let the tears come the way. Tides come inevitable, cleansing, carrying away everything that no longer belonged. January brought the custody hearing. It lasted 40 minutes. Bryce, now 5 weeks into recovery, presented Dr. Yates's cognitive assessment showing 73% restoration of baseline function. He presented his outpatient attendance record, perfect. He presented a stable living arrangement at my Hatteras home, a support network including Cora and Dale, and a plan to return to teaching by March. Desiree's attorney appeared alone. Desiree herself did not attend. She had relocated to Virginia, according to court records, and had not contested Bryce's custody petition. Her psychological evaluation, ordered by Judge Whitmore in December, remained incomplete. Her parenting assessment had not been scheduled. Judge Whitmore awarded full sole custody of Jonah to Bryce Calloway. No visitation rights for Desiree until and unless she completed the court-ordered evaluation, parenting program, and demonstrated sustained behavioral change. A process her attorney estimated would take 12 to 18 months minimum. The gavel fell at 9:42 in the morning. Bryce turned to me in the gallery, and this time his face formed the smile the medication had stolen. Full, unguarded, reaching his eyes the way light reaches the bottom of clear water. "It's over, Dad." I shook my head. "No, it's beginning." That afternoon, Bryce and Jonah walked the beach together, just the two of them, father and son, their footprints parallel in the wet sand. I watched from the porch with a cup of coffee going cold in my hands. Bryce moved slowly, still rebuilding his stamina, but Jonah matched his pace without being asked. Patient, steady. The sound, not the Atlantic. Behind them, the January ocean stretched silver and endless toward a horizon that promised nothing and everything simultaneously, the way all horizons do, the way all new beginnings do. Maggie's voice, quiet as always. "You built them a harbor, Walter. Now let them sail." February arrived with the kind of cold that clarifies, not the brutal, bone-deep freeze of northern states. Hatteras never truly freezes, but a sharp, crystalline chill that strips the air of humidity and makes every edge visible. The dunes stood razor-sharp against morning skies. The ocean lost its summer haze and became a hard blue line stretching to infinity. And in that clarity, I began to build. The idea had lived in me for months longer, maybe, since before Maggie died, since before Desiree, since the first time Jonah asked me what I did before I was a grandfather, and I told him I built things that connected separated places. He had looked at me with those wide brown eyes and said, "Like a bridge?" And I had said, "Exactly like a bridge." The project was simple in concept, complex in execution. A footbridge 42 feet long, arched, spanning the tidal creek that separated my property from the undeveloped dune field to the south. For 52 years, reaching that stretch of beach required a quarter-mile walk along the road and down a sandy path. Maggie had always wanted a direct crossing. She mentioned it perhaps a dozen times across our marriage casually, the way you mention something you want but never expect to receive. "Wouldn't it be nice, Walter, to just walk straight across?" I drew the plans on January 28th. Cedar posts sunk 4 feet into the creek bed. pressure-treated joists, decking of reclaimed dock planks, the same wood our kitchen table was built from, pulled from old fishing piers, decommissioned along the coast. Rope railings, a slight arch at center span to allow small boats and kayaks to pass beneath at high tide. Nothing extravagant, nothing engineered for traffic or weight beyond 3 or 4 people walking abreast. A bridge built for morning walks and sunset returns. A bridge built for a family. Dale helped me source the lumber. His brother-in-law operated a salvage yard in Wanchese and had 300 linear feet of dock plank curing in a warehouse dense, salt-hardened pine that had spent decades underwater and emerged stronger for it. The metaphor was not lost on me. Bryce joined the project on February 8th, 7 weeks post-withdrawal, cognitive function at 81%, according to Dr. Yates' latest assessment. His hands had steadied enough to hold a drill. His focus could sustain 90-minute work sessions before fatigue set in. We started slow, measuring, marking, cutting posts to length. Tasks that required precision, but not endurance. He worked in silence mostly, the way men work when they are rebuilding something larger than wood. On the 3rd day, while we were sinking the first cedar post into the creek bed cold water up to our shins, the February wind cutting across the marsh, Bryce stopped mid-swing and looked at me. "Dad, I knew." I held the post steady. "Knew what?" "That she was taking from you. The money. The fund." I saw the statements on her laptop once, maybe April of last year. "The flowchart. Your account numbers." He paused. The mallet hung at his side. I didn't do anything. The creek water moved around our boots, patient and cold. A heron stood 30 yards downstream, motionless, watching. "You were drugged, Bryce." "Before the drugs." I saw it before she changed the medication. I saw it, and I told myself it wasn't what it looked like. I told myself she was managing finances for the family. I told myself. His voice broke. Not dramatically a small fracture, like a hairline crack in a beam that has carried too much weight for too long. I set down my end of the post and straightened. The wind pressed my jacket against my chest. "Listen to me. You were already being controlled before the haloperidol, isolation, information restriction, financial dependence. She built the cage before she locked it. By the time you saw that flowchart, you were already inside. I should have called you. You couldn't. That's what this kind of abuse does. It makes the phone weigh 1,000 pounds. It makes every exit look like a cliff edge. You were not weak, son. You were trapped." He stared at the water moving past his boots. Then he lifted the mallet and drove the post 3 inches deeper into the creek bed, with a single stroke that sent vibrations up through my palms. "I won't be trapped again," he said. "No," I agreed. "You won't." We did not speak of it again that day. But something shifted between us. Some residual wall that guilt had built inside my son dissolved into the cold creek water and drifted out with the tide. He swung harder after that, measured more carefully, stayed an extra 30 minutes each session. By the 3rd week of February, we had 12 posts sunk and the first joists laid. Jonah joined us on weekends. His contributions were small but essential, handing us bolts, holding the tape measure, running to the workshop for forgotten tools. He wore a child-sized tool belt Cora had given him for his birthday, loaded with a plastic hammer, a stubby pencil, and a notepad where he recorded measurements. I called out to him. His handwriting had improved since the captain's log days, still a child's scrawl, but steadier, more deliberate. On February 22nd, a Saturday, we laid the first deck plank. Reclaimed dock pine, 4 inches wide, sanded smooth, still carrying the faint salt smell of its previous life beneath the water. Bryce held one end. I held the other. Jonah stood at center span with his pencil behind his ear, like a foreman supervising progress. "This plank is older than you, Dad," Jonah said, running his small hand across the grain. "Older than me too," I said. "Sight things get stronger with time. Wood, bones, families." Bryce caught my eye across the half-finished bridge. He did not smile. Not quite, but his face held something better than a smile. Peace. The specific, hard-earned peace of a man rebuilding his life with his own hands, plank by plank, day by day, in the company of people who would never charge him admission for their love. That evening, after Jonah was asleep and Bryce was reading in Maggie's room, I walked to the bridge alone. It stood half complete, in the moonlight 12 posts, 6 joists, 1 row of planking stretching partway across the dark water, unfinished. Imperfect, but already connecting what had been separated. I rested my hand on the railing post and looked south toward the dune field Maggie had wanted to reach directly for 52 years. 6 more weeks of work, maybe 7. Then the bridge would be complete, and the walk she always wanted would finally exist. "I'm building it, Maggie," I said to the darkness. "I know I'm 20 years late, but I'm building it." The creek water murmured beneath me, patient, persistent, carrying moonlight in its current, the way it carried everything. Without effort, without complaint, simply flowing toward the place it was always meant to reach. The bridge was finished on the first Saturday of April. 42 feet of reclaimed dock pines stretching across the tidal creek, arched at center span, rope railings taut and weatherproofed, every plank seated flush against its neighbor. A structure built to hold weight, withstand storms, and carry people from one side to the other without asking anything in return. We drove the final bolt at 10:17 in the morning. Bryce on one end with the torque wrench, Jonah on the other holding the washer in place with both hands, his tongue pressed against his upper lip in concentration. I stood at center span and felt something settle inside my chest, not with the drama of revelation, but with the quiet certainty of a tide reaching its highest mark. "Can we walk across now?" Jonah asked. "That's what it's for, sailor." He went first. 8 years old, 64 pounds. His sneakers making soft heartbeat sounds on the planking. At the far end, he stepped onto the sand of the South Dune field and turned back with his arms raised overhead. "I'm on the other side." Bryce went next. At center span, he paused and looked down at the creek water. "Mom would have loved this," he said quietly. "She would have used it every morning. Rain or shine, bathrobe and tea." He smiled full, easy, unmedicated, and continued across. I was last. 42 feet, 17 steps, each one carrying the weight of everything that brought us here. The invoice, the patio, Jonah's question about why love costs money, Maggie's warning letter, Dale's forensic audit, the wrong bottle, the wooden fish, the captain's log, the envelope, the courthouse, and now this. At center span, I stopped and whispered to the creek water, "Thank you, Maggie." Then I walked the remaining steps and joined my family. We spent that morning on the beach. No schedule, no timer, no invoice. Jonah found a conch shell and held it to his ear. Bryce built a fire ring from driftwood, steady hands, no tremor. I sat in the sand with my boots off and my chest full of something that had no name except enough. At noon, Cora appeared on the bridge carrying sandwiches and coffee, proving the structure worked exactly as intended. She settled beside me in the sand. Dale called. "The restitution cleared this morning. 47,000 deposited at 0900. I nodded. The money mattered, but sitting on that beach with the bridge behind me and the ocean before me, it felt like a footnote. The real restitution was measured in Jonah's laughter, as a wave surprised his ankles. And Victor? Indicted Wednesday. Federal wire fraud and conspiracy. Bail denied. His brother lost the medical license permanently. Desiree's civil case is pending in Virginia. Silas says she'll settle to avoid trial. I let the information settle like sediment in still water. The structure Desiree built to control us had collapsed the way poorly engineered structures always collapse from the foundation up, one failure cascading into the next. That evening, Bryce and I sat on the back deck. The lighthouse beam swept across the darkness 7.5 seconds between rotations. We drank coffee in comfortable silence. "I'm going back to teaching in September," Bryce said. "Cape Hatteras Secondary. The board approved my return." "You'd move here?" Jonah loves it here. I love it here. And I don't want distance to ever be a weapon someone uses against this family again. The beam swept past us. 7.5 seconds of darkness, then light again. There's room, I said. There's always been room. I stood and walked to the porch railing. The bridge was invisible in the darkness, but absolutely present, the way all well-built things remain present, whether you can see them or not. Maggie had wanted that bridge for 52 years. It took me losing almost everything to finally build it. Perhaps that is the cost of certain wisdoms. You cannot learn them gently. You learn them in storms and courtrooms and garages where your son lies shaking on cold concrete. You learn them in the weight of an envelope that carries more truth than a man should have to assemble alone. But I was not alone. Cora at dawn with coffee and intelligence. Dale with his forensic precision. Maggie's letter waiting like a lighthouse beam preserved in ink. And Jonah brave, patient Jonah, writing the truth in blue crayon because no one else could. The beam swept again. Still shining. After everything, the theft, the drugs, the forged signatures, the deadbolts, the invoices, the silence, the light still moved across the water. Not because darkness had been defeated. Darkness returns every single night with absolute reliability. The light shines because someone keeps the mechanism turning. Someone climbs the stairs. Someone cleans the lens. Someone refuses to let the beam go dark. Love is not a lighthouse that shines on its own. Love is the keeper who climbs the stairs every evening, even when his bones ache and the wind howls and the stairs seem endless. Love is the choice to keep shining, when every rational calculation says the darkness has already won. I am 68 years old. My wife is gone. My savings were stolen and recovered. My son was drugged and healed. My grandson was locked behind a deadbolt and freed. And across my creek, a bridge stands built by 3 generations working together, plank by plank, in the patient winter light. If you are standing where I stood 14 months ago watching someone you love disappear behind a wall of contracts and control, hear this. Document everything. Tell someone you trust. And never believe the lighthouse has gone dark just because you cannot see it from where you are standing. The beam is still sweeping. The keeper is still climbing. It is always still shining.